She woke up alone in the snow and realized her own children had left her there. Lorraine Whitaker thought it was just a weekend getaway. Fresh air, family time, a chance to clear her head. But when the dizziness faded and the forest grew dark around her, she understood the truth. The car was gone, her phone was missing, and the only heartbeat beside her was her German shepherd's. In the silence of the woods, betrayal became survival, and survival became something neither she nor her children ever expected. If you found yourself alone like that, would you fight to go back to the life you had, or start over somewhere new? I'd love to hear what you think. The first snow of November came early that year, dusting the rooftops of Lorraine Whitaker's quiet subdivision in Ashland County with a thin, glittering veil. From her kitchen window, she watched the flakes drift lazily past the maple tree in her front yard. The same tree her late husband had planted 30 years ago when the house was new and their children were small. Lorraine stood at the counter, hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee, listening to the soft hum of the furnace. At 69, she still rose before sunrise out of habit, the rhythm of hospital shifts etched permanently into her bones. Even in retirement, she liked the quiet hours before the world stirred. They reminded her she was steady, capable, unrushed. Behind her, a low thump of a tail against the cabinet announced Atlas's presence. The German shepherd lay near the back door, his ears alert, amber eyes tracking her movements with quiet devotion. His coat caught the faint gray light filtering through the window, on the thick fur along his neck forming a protective ruff that made him look larger than he was. "Too early for breakfast," she murmured without turning. Atlas's tail thumped again, slower this time. She had adopted him 4 years earlier, a week after her husband, Raymond, passed from a sudden aneurysm. The house had felt hollow then, cavernous in a way it never had before. Atlas had filled it, not with noise but with presence. He was calm, observant, intensely loyal. A retired trauma nurse didn't believe in fate, but sometimes she suspected the dog had arrived exactly when he was needed. The doorbell rang at 9 sharp. Atlas rose instantly, body stiff, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. Lorraine glanced at the clock. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, cold air rushed inside along with her son, Grant. Mom!" he said, his voice brighter than usual. He leaned in for a quick hug, smelling faintly of aftershave and something metallic, like stress. "Grant?" she replied, surprised but smiling. "What are you doing up this early?" "Just wanted to check in," he said, stepping inside and stamping snow from his boots. "Thought you might need help with the yard before winter really hits." Atlas did not move from Lorraine's side. His gaze followed Grant's every motion. Grant noticed. "Still not a fan of me, huh?" "He's protective," Lorraine said lightly, resting a hand on the dog's broad head. "Occupational hazard of living with a former ER nurse." Grant laughed, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. They sat at the kitchen table, and Lorraine listened as her son spoke about business. "Real estate had slowed," he explained. "When our listings were stalling, buyers were scarce, interest rates were a nightmare." He rubbed his temples as he talked, something he'd done since high school whenever he was overwhelmed. "You ever think about selling this place?" he asked casually, gesturing around the kitchen. "Before the market dips worse?" Lorraine blinked. "Selling?" "Just thinking long term. It's a lot of house for one person. Winters are getting harder." Her gaze drifted to the hallway where framed photographs lined the wall. Grant at 8, missing a front tooth. Melissa in her prom dress. Raymond standing proudly beside a freshly painted porch. The house didn't feel like a lot. It felt like history. "I manage fine," she said gently. "Of course you do." Grant leaned forward quickly. "You're the toughest person I know. I just mean, maybe closer to me. Or to Melissa. Somewhere warmer. Easier." Atlas shifted, placing himself between Lorraine's chair and Grant's knee. Grant gave a small, awkward smile. "Guess he likes this place too." Later that afternoon, Melissa arrived unannounced. Lorraine had barely finished clearing lunch dishes when her daughter's silver SUV pulled into the driveway. Melissa stepped out wearing oversized sunglasses despite the overcast sky, her hair pulled back into a tight bun that emphasized the strain in her face. She hugged Lorraine longer than usual. "Mom, you look tired," Melissa said as they stepped inside. "I look 69, Lorraine replied dryly. Melissa's laugh was brittle. "You don't have to do everything alone, you know." The comment lingered in the air. Over tea, Melissa spoke carefully about her marriage. Things are complicated," she admitted. "I just worry about you being here by yourself." Atlas lay under Lorraine's chair, but his eyes never left Melissa. It struck Lorraine how similar the conversations were. The same gentle nudges, the same subtle concern. Sell the house. Downsize. Move closer. Before winter. The phrase repeated between them like a quiet drumbeat. When Grant returned that evening, having just happened to be nearby, Lorraine felt a flicker of something she couldn't name. Not fear. Not yet. Just speed. Everything felt slightly accelerated, as though decisions were being placed on a conveyor belt. They lingered at the dinner table long after the plates were cleared. "You ever forget things, Mom?" Melissa asked softly. "Like appointments?" Lorraine's brow lifted. "Everyone forgets things." Grant nodded too quickly. "It's normal. We just want to make sure you're not overwhelmed." Atlas rose suddenly and moved to stand beside Lorraine's chair, his body angled outward toward both siblings. His ears were pinned back now, not in aggression, but in warning. Lorraine felt the weight of his presence against her leg. She looked at her children, grown, anxious, speaking in careful tones, and forced a small smile. "I appreciate the concern," she said evenly, "but I'm doing just fine." Outside, snow continued to fall, coating the neighborhood in quiet white. Inside, the warmth of the house held steady. And yet, beneath the steady hum of the furnace and the polite conversation around her table, Lorraine sensed something subtle shifting, like ice beginning to form beneath calm water. Atlas did not relax once that evening. By the time December settled in, the snowbanks along Lorraine Whitaker's driveway had hardened into uneven white walls. The sky hung low and pale most mornings, and the air carried that sharp northern Wisconsin stillness that made every sound travel farther than it should. Grant and Melissa began visiting more often, not together at first. Sometimes it was Grant, arriving mid-afternoon with coffee he claimed was from a new cafe downtown. Other days it was Melissa, appearing with homemade soup or an armful of mail she'd insisted on picking up from the box before Lorraine could walk out into the cold. "You shouldn't be slipping on ice," Melissa said one afternoon, brushing snow from her boots in the entryway. "It only takes one fall." Lorraine raised an eyebrow. "I worked 25 years in trauma. I know what falls look like." Melissa smiled thinly. "Exactly." Atlas had grown accustomed to visitors over the years, but he had never acted the way he did now. He didn't bark excessively or show his teeth. Instead, he watched, closely. When Grant leaned over Lorraine's shoulder to look at her calendar, Atlas would stand and insert himself between them. When Melissa reached for Lorraine's arm in an overly gentle way, Atlas's body would go rigid, ears tilting back in quiet tension. Lorraine tried to brush it off. "They're just worried," she told herself one evening as she wiped down the kitchen counter. "They're adults. They have their own stress." Grant's business had worsened. She could see it in the way he rubbed his hands together. In the way his phone buzzed constantly with notifications he silenced too quickly. Melissa's marriage was unraveling, though she offered details sparingly. Lorraine recognized the signs of collapse, the forced brightness, the exhaustion beneath the eyes. Concern could make people strange, but the suggestions kept returning. "You ever think about taking a break, Mom?" Grant asked one Sunday afternoon, leaning against the doorway of her living room. Snowlight filtered through the curtains, casting long gray shadows across the carpet. "Just a weekend. Somewhere quiet." "I live somewhere quiet," Lorraine replied, adjusting the throw blanket across her lap. "Different kind of quiet," he said quickly. "More refreshing." Melissa stepped in from the kitchen. "There's a retreat near the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. It's beautiful. 2 cabins, guided hikes, no cell service for a bit. It forces you to unplug." Lorraine looked up at them both. "No cell service?" Melissa laughed lightly. "Mom, that's the point. A reset. Lorraine studied her daughter's face. The laughter didn't reach her eyes. We could all go together, Grant added. Bonding, before winter really locks in. The phrase again, before winter. Atlas rose from the rug and walked slowly to Lorraine's side, pressing his hip against her knee. His tail didn't wag. He looked from Grant to Melissa and back again, as if measuring something only he could sense. It's just 2 nights, Melissa continued gently. Fresh air, trails. You love the outdoors. Lorraine did love the outdoors. She had taken Atlas hiking along forest paths every summer since she adopted him. She knew the smell of pine warmed by sun, the way frost clung to fallen leaves in early morning. The woods were familiar to her, grounding, but the sudden eagerness unsettled her. I don't know, she said carefully. Seems last minute. Grant stepped closer. Mom, you've seemed tired lately. She looked at him sharply. Tired? Just forgetful sometimes, Melissa added softly. You missed that dental appointment in October. Lorraine frowned. They rescheduled it. The office called. There was a small pause. Well, Grant said, shifting his weight. Maybe a little rest wouldn't hurt. Atlas let out a low, almost inaudible growl. Grant glanced down. He's really got it out for me. He's protective, Lorraine repeated, though this time her voice lacked its usual lightness. That night, after they left, she sat alone at the kitchen table, her hands folded around a cup of chamomile tea. Snow tapped faintly against the window pane. Atlas lay at her feet, but did not sleep. Am I forgetting things? She murmured to the empty room. She replayed the past few weeks in her mind. Grocery lists, medication schedules, utility bills. Everything was paid. Everything was remembered. She had worked in emergency rooms during blizzards, managed chaotic nights where seconds meant life or death. She trusted her mind. And yet, doubt had a way of slipping in quietly. The next afternoon, Grant called. I booked it, he said before she could fully greet him. Cabin's reserved for Friday. Just the 3 of us. Lorraine blinked. You booked it? You sounded open to it. I said I'd think about it. It'll do you good, Mom. Clear your head. Clear your head. She hesitated. Oh, Atlas is coming, she said firmly. There was a pause on the line. Dogs aren't usually allowed in places like that, Grant replied carefully. Then find one that allows him. Another silence. Fine, he said at last. Bring the dog. On Friday morning, the sky was a flat sheet of white. Grant's SUV idled in the driveway, exhaust curling in slow spirals. Melissa sat in the passenger seat, bundled in a heavy coat, her expression unreadable through the windshield. Lorraine locked her front door and slipped the key into her coat pocket. Atlas stood at her side, leash in hand, muscles taut beneath his fur. As she approached the vehicle, Atlas suddenly planted his paws and refused to move. Come on, she coaxed gently. He looked up at her, ears pinned back, then turned his head toward the house. Grant stepped out of the SUV. What's wrong with him? He doesn't want to leave, Lorraine said quietly. Dogs sense change, Melissa offered from the window. He'll settle. Grant opened the rear door and began loading Lorraine's overnight bag. Atlas emitted a low growl, deeper this time. Atlas? Lorraine warned softly. He obeyed, but reluctantly. Lorraine climbed into the back seat beside him. The door shut with a solid thud. As the SUV pulled away from the curb, Lorraine watched her house grow smaller through the frosted window. The maple tree in the yard stood bare against the gray sky. Snow drifted softly over the roof. Atlas shifted beside her, pressing his body firmly against her leg. Lorraine rested her hand on his thick fur. It's just a weekend, she whispered. But even as she said it, the faint, unsettling chill she'd felt weeks earlier deepened, like stepping onto ice that hadn't yet cracked, but might. The highway narrowed as they drove north, the neat suburban streets giving way to stretches of frozen farmland and dense pine forest. Snow lay thick along the shoulders of the road, untouched except for the occasional set of deer tracks. Lorraine watched the landscape change through the window. The farther they drove, the quieter the world seemed to become. Grant kept both hands on the steering wheel. He talked more than usual, about market trends, about interest rates, about nothing in particular. Melissa chimed in occasionally, her voice too light, too rehearsed. Lorraine listened but said little. Atlas had not relaxed once since they left home. He sat upright in the back seat, his body pressed firmly against Lorraine's thigh, as every time the SUV slowed or turned, his ears flicked forward. "How much farther?" Lorraine asked after nearly 2 hours. "Not far," Grant replied quickly. "We're just taking a scenic route. The retreat's tucked back a bit." They turned onto a narrower road, then another. Pavement gave way to packed gravel. The trees grew denser, towering pines arching overhead like a tunnel. Lorraine recognized the region. Chequamegon-Nicolate National Forest wasn't unfamiliar to her, but she didn't recognize this particular road. The GPS screen on the dashboard went dark. "No signal," Melissa said with a soft laugh. "See? Unplugged already?" Grant slowed the vehicle as they approached a small, snow-dusted trailhead clearing. A wooden sign stood crooked at the edge of the trees. Its lettering faded and partially buried in frost. There were no other cars. "This isn't the lodge," Lorraine said quietly. "It's close," Grant answered. "Thought we'd stretch our legs first. Cabin check-in isn't for another hour." Lorraine hesitated, scanning the empty clearing. The forest stood silent, heavy with winter stillness. Atlas began to growl. It wasn't loud. It was a deep vibration that Lorraine felt more than heard. "Easy," she murmured, placing her hand on his back. Grant killed the engine. The sudden silence felt enormous. They stepped out into the cold. The air bit sharply at Lorraine's cheeks. Snow crunched beneath their boots as they moved a few yards from the SUV. Melissa opened a thermos from the back seat. "Coffee?" she offered brightly. "Figured we'd want something warm before hiking in." Lorraine accepted the cup. The steam curled upward in the brittle air. Atlas refused the collapsible bowl Melissa set on the ground for him. He backed away from it, nose wrinkling. Instead, he circled Lorraine, pressing close to her legs. "Maybe he's just not thirsty," Grant said too quickly. Lorraine took a sip. The coffee was strong, slightly bitter. She took another swallow to warm herself. The cold didn't ease. Within minutes, a strange heaviness crept into her limbs. Her fingers tingled. The forest seemed to tilt slightly to the left. She blinked. "Grant," she began, her voice slower than she intended. "I feel—" Atlas barked sharply. Not a playful bark, a warning. Lorraine steadied herself against the hood of the SUV. The world narrowed at the edges, sound dulling as if cotton had been stuffed into her ears. Through the haze, she heard her children's voices, low, urgent. "Timing's off. Just wait. Documents. She won't remember." Lorraine tried to focus on their faces, but they blurred, their outlines melting into the gray sky. Atlas was barking now, louder, frantic. His paws scratched against the snow near her boots. "Mom, sit down." Melissa's voice floated toward her. Lorraine's knees buckled before she could respond. The ground rose to meet her, cold and unyielding. The last thing she felt was Atlas's body pressing against her side. When she opened her eyes, the light had changed. Dusk had settled over the forest, turning the snow faintly blue beneath the fading sky. The clearing was silent. Too silent. Lorraine lay on her side, half buried in a thin layer of drifting snow. Her head throbbed. Her mouth was dry. Atlas was pressed tightly against her torso, his warmth the only barrier between her and the frozen ground. When he saw her eyes open, he whined softly and licked her cheek. She tried to sit up. The movement sent a wave of dizziness through her body. "Grant?" she called hoarsely. No answer. "Melissa?" Only the whisper of wind through pine needles. Her heart began to pound. She forced herself upright, leaning heavily against Atlas as she scanned the clearing. The SUV was gone. The tire tracks that had marked their arrival were faint, already filling with wind-blown snow. Her handbag was gone. Her coat pocket felt light. She reached for her phone. It wasn't there. Atlas moved in tight circles around her, nose low to the ground, then returning to her side. The realization didn't strike all at once. It unfolded slowly, piece by piece, like frost spreading across glass. The coffee. The low voices. She won't remember. Her breathing grew shallow. No, she whispered to herself. No. She stood unsteadily, turning in a full circle. The forest loomed in every direction, dense, dark, indifferent. Atlas pressed against her again, his body trembling with contained energy. They'll come back, she muttered weakly. But even as she said it, the cold truth settled deeper than the winter air. The clearing was empty, and they had left her there. For a moment, Lorraine Whitaker simply stood, swaying slightly, the cold air scraping at her lungs. The sky had darkened into that deep winter blue that comes just before night closes in completely. The tree line looked sharper now, almost jagged, like a wall. Atlas stayed pressed against her leg. Okay, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Okay, think. Her training surfaced automatically. Even through the fog still lingering in her head, the habits of decades in emergency rooms began to anchor her. Assess the scene. Check your condition. Prioritize. Her pulse was elevated but steady. No visible bleeding. Limbs responsive, though sluggish. The dizziness was fading slowly, but her mouth felt dry in a way that didn't match the cold. Sedation, she thought. Mild. Enough to impair, not enough to knock her out completely. Her jaw tightened. She scanned the clearing again, forcing herself to look for anything she might have missed. There were no headlights in the distance. No engine sounds. No footprints except her own disturbed patch of snow and Atlas's anxious pacing. She walked unsteadily toward the edge of the clearing where the SUV had been parked. The tire tracks were faint, but clear enough to follow for a few yards before they disappeared down the narrow gravel road. They hadn't gotten stuck. They hadn't come back. Her handbag was gone. So was her phone. Her gloves, which she distinctly remembered setting on the back seat beside her, were gone too. Only her coat remained, zipped to her chin. Only Atlas. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the smell of pine and frozen earth. Fragments of conversation replayed in her mind. She won't remember. Documents. Timing. She closed her eyes, pressing her fingers against her temples. They hadn't been panicked. They had been deliberate. It'll look like confusion. She wanders sometimes. Melissa's voice had said that before back at the house. Lorraine felt something inside her chest shift, not break, not explode, but settle heavily into place. This wasn't an accident. They had planned it. Atlas suddenly barked once, sharp and urgent. Lorraine opened her eyes. Easy, she murmured, though her voice trembled. The sun slipped fully behind the tree line, and with it the temperature dropped another few degrees. The clearing darkened rapidly, shadows stretching long and thin across the snow. She needed shelter. The nurse in her began calculating automatically. It was early December in northern Wisconsin. Nighttime temperatures could drop into the teens or lower. Exposure would set in quickly, especially if she remained stationary. She glanced toward the narrow trail that disappeared into the trees. A wooden marker stood half-buried nearby, its lettering faded beyond easy reading. The forest beyond looked dense and uninviting. She tested her balance again. Better now. The dizziness was nearly gone, replaced by a dull ache behind her eyes. Grant, she whispered, the name catching in her throat. Melissa. No echo answered her. Atlas moved in a tight circle around her, and then pressed his nose against her gloved hand, nudging insistently. I know, she said softly. I know. She took a slow breath and forced herself to think logically. If she stayed in the clearing, she would be exposed to wind all night. No cover, no fire, no supplies. Her only insulation would be the coat on her back and the warmth of the dog beside her. If she went into the woods, she risked disorientation, but the clearing offered nothing. She looked down at Atlas. His ears were forward now, not flattened in anxiety, but focused. His body angled slightly toward the tree line. You want to go? she asked quietly. He gave a small whine, shifting his weight. Lorraine hesitated. For a brief, fragile moment, she imagined headlights appearing around the bend. The SUV reversing. Grant stepping out with apologies. Melissa claiming a misunderstanding. But she knew better. No one leaves a 70-year-old woman without a phone in a national forest at dusk by accident. The wind cut sharper across the clearing. She turned slowly in a circle one last time, memorizing the space, the crooked signpost, the patch of snow where she had fallen, the faint tire tracks vanishing into gray. Something inside her steadied. "Okay," she said under her breath. "We move." Atlas immediately stepped closer, shoulder brushing her thigh. She gripped the leash tighter. They entered the tree line together. Thus the forest swallowed them almost instantly. Pine branches hung heavy with snow, muffling sound. The ground beneath the trees was uneven, roots hidden beneath frost. Lorraine walked carefully, each step deliberate. The light faded quickly. Within minutes, the clearing behind them disappeared from view. Lorraine's breathing grew louder in her ears. Every crack of a branch underfoot seemed magnified. She listened for the distant hum of an engine, for anything that might suggest she had been wrong. There was nothing. Atlas walked slightly ahead now, pulling just enough to indicate direction, but not enough to unbalance her. He stopped occasionally, sniffing the air, then continuing forward. The sky darkened to black. Lorraine's fingers began to stiffen despite the gloves. She flexed them periodically to maintain circulation. You protected strangers your whole career," she murmured to herself, pushing through the growing cold. "You can protect yourself." Atlas suddenly froze, body rigid. Lorraine stopped as well, heart hammering. He sniffed the air, then turned his head back toward her. After a brief pause, he moved closer and pressed firmly against her leg again. Not alarm, just reassurance. She exhaled slowly. The forest felt endless, dense, indifferent. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The betrayal settled deeper as she walked. Not just abandonment. Preparation. The coffee. The missing phone. The carefully planted suggestions about confusion. Her throat tightened, but no tears came. Shock had a way of drying everything out. "I raised you," she whispered into the darkness. Atlas walked on. The temperature dropped again. But Lorraine realized she would not make it far in the dark. Her steps had already slowed. The sedation might have worn off, but exhaustion was setting in quickly. She needed to conserve energy. "Shelter," she muttered. She scanned the forest floor and spotted a slight depression between two fallen logs, partially shielded from wind. It wasn't much, but it was better than open ground. She guided Atlas into the shallow hollow and lowered herself carefully, back against one of the logs. Atlas immediately curled around her torso, his body forming a protective barrier against the cold. His warmth radiated through her coat. She wrapped one arm around his thick neck. "Stay," she whispered. He didn't move. The night stretched long and merciless. The forest creaked occasionally as branches shifted under frost. Once, far in the distance, something howled. A lone coyote, maybe. Lorraine stayed awake as long as she could, forcing herself to monitor her own breathing, her own clarity. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't wandering. This was deliberate. The final fragment of overheard conversation surfaced clearly now. She won't remember. Lorraine stared into the darkness. She remembered everything. The cold pressed against her bones through the long hours before dawn. Atlas remained curled tightly against her, his steady breathing the only rhythm in the silent forest. Every so often, he would lift his head, ears flicking toward distant sounds, then settle again when nothing approached. Lorraine didn't sleep. She monitored herself the way she had monitored patients for decades, tracking her pulse, flexing her fingers and toes, shifting position to keep blood moving. Well, the sedation had worn off entirely now, leaving behind a dull headache and the ache of betrayal. But she was clear. Clear enough to know she could not stay where she was. When the first thin line of gray appeared between the trees, she carefully pushed herself upright. Her joints protested. Atlas immediately stood as well, shaking snow from his coat. Morning, partner, she whispered, her voice rough. Atlas nudged her hand, then turned toward the deeper woods. The clearing was somewhere behind them, but Lorraine had no intention of returning to it. If her children came back, which she no longer believed they would, it would be too late. She needed to find help, a road, a structure, anything. Atlas began walking, not wandering, but moving with quiet determination. His head was lowered slightly, a nose catching scent along the frozen ground. Every few steps, he would glance back to ensure she followed. "You've got an idea, don't you?" she murmured. He gave a soft chuff and continued. Lorraine hesitated only briefly. Following a dog into deeper forest territory might have once seemed foolish. But Atlas wasn't panicked. He wasn't pacing randomly. He moved as if recalling something. A memory surfaced. 2 summers earlier, she had taken Atlas hiking in this region. He had bolted after a deer, chasing it up a narrow path that led toward an old fire observation tower trail. She had scolded him at the time, breathless from the incline. The path had been faint but visible. Could he remember that? "Is that where we're going?" she asked softly. Atlas tugged gently at the leash. Lorraine made her choice. "If we stay, when we freeze," she said under her breath. "If we move, we might find something." She adjusted her coat collar higher against the morning chill and stepped forward. The terrain sloped gradually upward. Snow clung unevenly to the forest floor, revealing patches of old trail beneath. Lorraine's boots slipped occasionally, but she kept her balance by placing each foot carefully, using tree trunks for support when needed. Atlas maintained a steady pace, never pulling too hard, never moving too far ahead. The forest began to change subtly as they walked. The trees thinned slightly, and the ground showed faint depressions where boots had once passed in warmer seasons. Lorraine's heart lifted just a fraction. "Trail," she breathed. Her exhaustion remained heavy, but something stronger began to surface beneath it. Purpose. They walked for what felt like hours, though it was likely less than one. Lorraine's breathing grew labored on the incline. She paused frequently, leaning against trees, closing her eyes briefly to steady herself. Each time she stopped, Atlas stopped with her. Each time she moved, he resumed leading. The cold air burned in her lungs. Her calves trembled with effort. She was aware of her age now in a way she hadn't been in years. 69 wasn't young, but it wasn't helpless either. "You raised 2 kids," she muttered. "You worked night shifts during blizzards. You can walk a few more miles." Atlas suddenly halted again. This time he angled left, off the faint path and toward a stand of taller pines. Lorraine frowned. "That's not the trail." But Atlas was insistent. He pulled, not sharply, but firmly enough to redirect her. But Lorraine hesitated, scanning the trees. The ground beyond looked slightly clearer, less tangled with fallen branches. "Okay," she conceded. They pushed through the stand of pines, snow brushing against her coat. After several yards, Lorraine noticed something ahead, a vertical shape rising above the trees. At first she thought it was just another trunk. Then she saw the outline more clearly. A structure. A narrow wooden tower, weathered and partially obscured by frost. Her heart skipped. They approached slowly. The tower stood at the edge of a small clearing, its steps leading up to a box-like cabin perched above. It was old, likely decommissioned, but intact. An old forest fire watch station. "You remembered," she whispered to Atlas. Atlas circled the base of the tower, sniffing carefully. Lorraine approached the small ground-level cabin attached beneath it. The door was wooden, worn, but closed. She reached for the handle. It turned. The interior was sparse but dry. A small cot stood against one wall. A metal shelf held emergency blankets sealed in plastic. A dusty first aid kit hung near the door, and mounted beside a small window was a laminated sheet listing Ranger radio frequencies. Lorraine stepped inside slowly, Atlas following and immediately positioning himself near the entrance. The air inside was colder than a heated home but warmer than the open forest, protected. Her legs gave out suddenly, and she lowered herself onto the cot, breathing hard. "Good boy," she whispered hoarsely. Atlas came to her side, pressing his body against her once again. Lorraine forced herself upright after a few moments. Well, she scanned the space with clinical focus. Supplies were minimal but enough to stabilize. She opened the first aid kit, confirming its contents. Bandages, antiseptic, basic medication. Her gaze locked on the small emergency radio mounted near the wall. It looked functional. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for it. She flipped the switch. Static crackled. She adjusted the frequency knob slowly, referencing the laminated chart. The sound sharpened slightly. "Come on," she murmured. She pressed the transmission button. "This is Lorraine Whitaker," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "I'm at an old fire watch station near the Chequamegon-Nicolet Forest. I was left without transportation. I require assistance." Static. Then silence. She swallowed and tried again. "My name is Lorraine Whitaker. Oh, I need assistance." The static shifted. A faint voice broke through. "Repeat. Identify." Relief flooded her so suddenly she nearly dropped the radio. "Lorraine Whitaker," she repeated clearly. "Former trauma nurse. I'm at the old fire watch cabin near Trail 17. I was left here yesterday afternoon." A pause, then. "Copy that. Stay where you are. Ranger unit en route." Lorraine closed her eyes. Atlas rested his chin on her knee. "You did it," she whispered to him. For the first time since waking in the clearing, the forest no longer felt endless. It felt survivable. Lorraine sat on the narrow cot inside the fire watch cabin, her hands wrapped around the emergency blanket she had pulled from its plastic wrapping. Atlas stood near the door, body angled toward the outside world, ears alert to every sound. The radio crackled again. "Ma'am, stay put. Ranger unit approximately 40 minutes out. Can you confirm your condition?" Lorraine leaned toward the device. "Conscious? Stable? Mild sedation. Likely administered yesterday afternoon. I have no phone, no transportation." A pause. "Copy that," the voice replied. "Name's Elijah Torres. We'll get you out." She let the name settle in her mind. A real person. A steady voice in the static. 40 minutes felt manageable. She had endured longer stretches of uncertainty in trauma bays filled with alarms and chaos. This was quieter, colder, but clearer. She forced herself to drink from a small plastic water bottle she found in the emergency supply bin. The water tasted faintly metallic, but soothed her dry throat. Atlas watched her intently, then finally lowered himself onto the wooden floor, as though he did not relax fully. "You led us here," she murmured to him. "I owe you more than I can say." He thumped his tail once. The minutes stretched, but they no longer felt endless. Outside the cabin window, the sky brightened slowly as morning matured into late day. Snow glinted in fractured light. Then she heard it. Faint at first. A distant mechanical hum. Atlas sprang to his feet. The hum grew louder, uneven over rough terrain. Lorraine stepped carefully to the doorway and opened it just as an ATV broke through the trees, a forest ranger in a dark green jacket guiding it steadily through the snow. The engine cut, and the sudden quiet felt enormous. The ranger removed his helmet. He appeared to be in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, steady-eyed. "Lorraine Whitaker?" he called. "Yes," she replied, stepping forward. Now Atlas positioned himself between them, protective but not aggressive. The ranger lifted both hands calmly. "Easy there, buddy. I'm Elijah Torres." Lorraine placed a hand on Atlas's collar. "He's just doing his job." Torres nodded. His gaze moved quickly, assessing her posture, her color, the steadiness in her voice. "You're in good shape considering," he said. "We got your call and traced the old tower frequency. That cabin hasn't been used in years." "It saved us," she said quietly. Torres glanced around the clearing. "You mentioned being left?" Lorraine met his eyes. "Yes." He studied her for a moment, as though measuring something beyond the obvious. "Let's get you warmed up properly," he said finally. "Then we'll talk." The ride out of the forest was jarring but swift. Lorraine sat behind Torres on the ATV, Atlas positioned between them, secured carefully but alert. The cold wind bit at her cheeks, but relief flowed stronger than the chill. As they neared the ranger station, Lorraine's mind began to organize events again, in clinical order. Coffee. Dizziness. Fragments of conversation. Missing phone. This had not been confusion. The ranger station was modest but warm, tucked near a wider forest road. Inside, the heat wrapped around her like another blanket. Torres handed her a steaming cup of real coffee and a thick towel for her shoulders. Paramedics arrived shortly after. They asked careful questions, took vitals, noted her orientation, her clarity. "You're sharp," one of them said lightly. "I was drugged," Lorraine replied evenly. "I'm not confused." They exchanged a glance. At the small regional hospital later that evening, her fluorescent lights hummed overhead as nurses drew blood. Lorraine watched the vials fill calmly. She recognized the procedures intimately. She had once stood on the other side of the bed countless times. Atlas lay on the floor just beside her hospital cot, permitted after she insisted he had been instrumental in her survival. Toxicology results came back quicker than she expected. "Sedative traces," the attending physician said, brows knit together. "Mild but present." Lorraine absorbed the words without visible reaction. "Intentional?" she asked. The doctor hesitated. Hard to determine source without more information. But Lorraine knew. Grant and Melissa arrived just before midnight. They rushed into the hospital room with exaggerated urgency. Melissa's eyes were red-rimmed. Grant's jaw was tight. "Mom!" Melissa cried, stepping forward as if to embrace her. Atlas rose instantly, positioning himself between them again. "Easy," Lorraine said softly to the dog, though she did not invite her daughter closer. Grant shook his head. "We were terrified. You wandered off during that hike. We turned around for 2 minutes and you were gone." Lorraine studied his face carefully. "Wandered?" she repeated. "Yes," Melissa said quickly. "You seemed disoriented. We thought maybe—" She stopped. "Maybe what?" Lorraine asked quietly. Grant cleared his throat. "You were confused, Mom. We were worried about that." Lorraine felt something shift inside her. Not anger, not yet. Something colder. "My phone was gone," she said. Grant blinked. "What?" "My phone, my handbag, my gloves. Why were they gone?" Melissa looked at Grant, then back at Lorraine. "Oh, you must have dropped them." "In the clearing?" Lorraine pressed. "Without you noticing?" Silence lingered for a second too long. Ranger Torres appeared at the doorway then, stepping inside with quiet authority. "We're reviewing trailhead footage," he said calmly. "There are cameras near the parking access road." Grant stiffened. "Why?" "Standard procedure," Torres replied. "To piece together timelines." Lorraine held her children's gaze. She saw it now clearly, the calculation beneath the worry. They had not expected her to speak so clearly. They had not expected her to remember so precisely. Atlas lowered his head slightly, but did not step away. The room felt different now, not chaotic, not uncertain, clear. Lorraine leaned back against the pillow, her eyes steady. "I didn't wander," she said softly, but neither Grant nor Melissa responded. Outside the hospital window, snow began to fall again, soft and relentless, covering everything in clean white. Inside the room, nothing felt clean anymore. Lorraine Whitaker lay propped against stiff hospital pillows, the thin cotton blanket pulled to her chest. The antiseptic scent of the room mixed with the faint metallic trace she had always associated with blood draws and IV lines. It was a familiar environment, but this time she was the one being observed. Atlas lay on the linoleum floor beside her bed, chin resting on his paws, eyes open. He had not slept since the forest. Grant and Melissa stood near the foot of the bed. Their coats were still dusted with snow, melting slowly into dark patches on the fabric. They looked like concerned children. They sounded like concerned children. Oh, but Lorraine had worked too many trauma cases not to recognize when something underneath didn't match what appeared on the surface. Ranger Elijah Torres remained near the doorway, hands loosely clasped in front of him. "We're not accusing anyone," Torres said evenly. "We're just verifying timelines." Grant nodded too quickly. "Of course, we want answers too." Lorraine watched his mouth as he spoke, the slight tightening at the corners, the tension along his jaw. Tell me again, she said softly. How I wandered off. Melissa swallowed. We parked. You had coffee. We were getting ready to hike and you just walked into the trees. We thought you were right ahead of us. With my phone, Lorraine asked. We assumed you had it. And my bag. You must have left it in the car, Grant said. The car you drove away in. The silence that followed was thick and unmistakable. Atlas shifted, rising to his feet, his body angling slightly toward Grant. Torres cleared his throat gently. The camera at the access road shows your vehicle leaving the trailhead approximately 20 minutes after you arrived. 2 occupants. Grant's face drained of color. What does that prove? Maybe she walked back to the road. There's no footage of her on the road, Torres replied. Lorraine felt her pulse steady rather than spike. Something inside her had crossed from shock into clarity. Why did you suggest I've been confused lately? She asked, looking directly at Melissa. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. Because you have been forgetful. We were worried. Lorraine's gaze did not waver. I paid my bills. I kept my appointments. I managed my home. What exactly have I forgotten? Melissa opened her mouth but said nothing. Grant stepped in. Mom, you're twisting this. We were scared. You were acting strange. Strange how? Lorraine pressed. No answer came. The attending physician entered then, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Whitaker, toxicology confirms a mild sedative consistent with over-the-counter antihistamine levels, but the concentration suggests it was administered in beverage form. Lorraine nodded once. Grant stared at the floor. Melissa began to cry quietly. Atlas remained perfectly still. The doctor continued. Given your cognitive clarity now and your medical background, there's no indication of confusion or memory impairment. Lorraine met her children's eyes again. I remember the words, she said quietly. Oh, timing. Documents. She won't remember. Melissa's shoulders shook. You're misinterpreting. Am I? Lorraine interrupted gently. Torres stepped forward slightly. We'll need formal statements from both of you. Grant exhaled sharply. This is ridiculous. She's our mother. And I am still capable of understanding what happened to me, Lorraine replied. The room fell silent except for the faint hum of hospital ventilation. Lorraine did not yell. She did not accuse loudly. She simply watched them unravel under the weight of their own explanations. After several long moments, Torres motioned toward the hallway. Let's give Mrs. Whitaker time to rest. Grant hesitated, then turned for the door. Melissa followed, wiping her face. As they left, Lorraine spoke one more time. My phone, she said calmly. Where is it? Neither of them looked back. The door closed softly behind them. The hospital room felt larger now, quieter. Torres approached the bed. We'll investigate properly, he said. You're not obligated to make decisions tonight. Lorraine nodded. I don't want revenge, she said after a moment. I want clarity. Torres studied her with respect. You're handling this better than most would. I've seen worse, she replied softly. In different forms. When he left, the room settled into stillness. Lorraine reached down and placed her hand on Atlas's head. They thought I wouldn't remember, she murmured. Atlas lifted his eyes to hers. I remember everything. She lay back slowly, exhaustion finally pressing down now that survival was no longer immediate. But beneath the fatigue, something else was forming. Not rage, was not panic. Resolve. Outside, snow continued to blanket the town in quiet white. Inside, Lorraine's mind moved carefully through the next steps. She would not shout. She would not lash out. But she would not protect them from consequences either. Atlas shifted closer to the bed, resting his chin against the mattress. Lorraine closed her eyes, not in denial but in calculation. The betrayal had been deliberate. So would be her response. Lorraine was discharged 2 days later. The hospital hallway felt strangely unfamiliar as she walked through it, no longer as a nurse moving with purpose between rooms, but as a patient being watched for signs of weakness. Atlas stayed pressed close to her side, leash loose but his body alert. Ranger Torres met her near the exit. "We've filed an official report," he said. "Oh, toxicology results are documented. Trail footage confirms they left the area without you." Lorraine nodded once. "And their statement?" "Inconsistent," he replied carefully. "They're claiming confusion, concern for your mental state." She gave a small, humorless smile. "Convenient? Do you want to pursue charges immediately?" he asked. Lorraine paused before answering. She thought of Grant as a boy, running through her kitchen with scraped knees. Melissa at 16, crying over a failed math test. She remembered nights she had worked double shifts to pay for college tuition. "I want the investigation to continue," she said calmly, "but I won't make decisions from a hospital bed." Torres studied her face. "Understood." Outside, the winter air hit her lungs with sharp clarity. But her house looked exactly as she had left it. Snow covering the driveway, the maple tree bare against the sky. But the familiarity felt thinner now, like a photograph of a place she once knew. She unlocked the front door. Atlas entered first, scanning the living room before stepping aside. Lorraine followed slowly, taking in the framed photographs, the couch indentation where she usually read in the evenings, the faint scent of pine cleaner lingering in the air. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. Her phone sat on the kitchen counter. She stopped cold. She walked toward it slowly, as if approaching evidence in a crime scene. The screen was powered off. She picked it up. Battery drained. When she plugged it in and powered it on, notifications flooded the screen, missed calls from Grant, texts from Melissa asking where she had gone, all time-stamped after the ranger station had contacted them. She set the phone down carefully. Atlas watched her from the doorway, head tilted slightly. "They rehearsed this," she murmured. Lorraine did not cry. Instead, she made tea. The simple act grounded her. Boiling water, measuring leaves, pouring into a mug. Steam curled upward, soft and steady. She sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop. First, she contacted her attorney. Then she called her bank. "I'd like to update beneficiary structures and assign independent oversight on my estate," she said calmly. "Effective immediately." The banker hesitated. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Whitaker?" "It will be," she replied. Over the next few days, Lorraine moved through her life with deliberate precision. She met with a financial advisor unaffiliated with her family. She reviewed property documents. She contacted an independent trustee recommended by her attorney. She did not mention these steps to Grant or Melissa. When they called, she answered. When they expressed concern, she listened. "You scared us," Grant said over the phone. "You just disappeared." "I was drugged," Lorraine replied evenly. A pause. "You can't prove that we—" "The toxicology report is clear." Another silence. "Mom," Melissa said softly, "we were trying to help you. By leaving me in the forest? That's not what happened." Lorraine closed her eyes briefly. "You'll receive correspondence from my attorney soon," she said calmly. "All communication should go through him." She ended the call. Atlas stepped closer and rested his chin on her knee. "You stayed," she whispered to him. Days passed. The investigation continued quietly. Lorraine cooperated fully, providing clear statements, recounting overheard words, detailing the missing phone and bag. She did not embellish. She did not dramatize. She simply told the truth. At night, sleep came unevenly. She would wake to faint echoes of wind through pine trees, to the memory of dusk settling over the clearing. Each time, Atlas shifted closer, his warmth grounding her back in the present. One afternoon, she drove north again, not into the deep forest, but toward the ranger district office. Torres met her outside. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said. "You don't owe me thanks," he replied. "You saved yourself." Lorraine glanced at Atlas. "He did." Torres nodded. "Torres. Oh, smart dog." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. "There's a non-profit group here," Torres added after a pause. "They focus on wilderness safety training for older adults. Navigation basics, emergency preparedness." Lorraine considered that. "Many assume seniors are automatically vulnerable," he continued. "Truth is, with proper awareness, they're often more disciplined than younger hikers." A faint spark ignited in her chest. "What do they need?" she asked. "Volunteers with real-world experience." Lorraine looked out at the snow-covered trees. "I have experience," she said quietly. When she returned home that evening, she stood once more in her living room. The house felt less like an anchor now and more like an option. She walked slowly through each room, touching door frames, remembering decades of family life. Then she opened a blank document on her laptop. House for sale. Not to fund her children. To fund something else entirely. Atlas lay at her feet as she typed. This time, the shift was not born of fear. It was chosen. And Lorraine Whitaker, retired trauma nurse, was no longer waiting to see what her children would do next. She was deciding what she would do. The for sale sign went up 3 weeks later. It stood at the edge of her front yard, white against snow. Simple black lettering, announcing what once would have seemed impossible. Neighbors slowed as they drove past. A few called to ask if everything was all right. "It is now," Lorraine answered each time. Inside the house, cardboard boxes began to stack along the hallway. She packed methodically. Medical textbooks first, then framed photographs, and then the small wooden box of Raymond's old wristwatches she had never had the heart to move. Atlas followed her from room to room, occasionally pausing to sniff empty corners where furniture had once stood. "You remember this place too?" she said softly, as she removed a painting from the living room wall. The decision to sell had not been impulsive. The estate had been restructured. An independent trustee now oversaw her assets. The majority would no longer pass automatically to her children. Portions were earmarked for community initiatives, wilderness safety education, elder outreach, emergency preparedness training. She did not announce these changes publicly. Grant learned of them through certified mail. He called immediately. "You're overreacting," he said, his voice tight with disbelief. "Oh, you can't just cut us out." "I haven't cut you out," Lorraine replied calmly. "I've removed assumptions." "Mom, this is insane. People your age don't make decisions like this alone." "I am not confused," she said evenly, "and I am not alone." Atlas lifted his head at the tone in her voice. Melissa called later that evening, her approach softer. "Can we talk in person?" she asked. "Public place," Lorraine said. They met at a small cafe downtown. Melissa arrived first. She looked tired, thinner than before. Her second marriage had ended quietly in the background of everything else. She stirred her coffee without drinking it. "You're punishing us," Melissa said gently. Lorraine folded her hands on the table. "No, I'm protecting myself." "It wasn't supposed to go like that." The admission hung in the air. And Lorraine did not flinch. "How was it supposed to go?" Melissa looked down. We thought you'd be disoriented, that it would look like you wandered." "And then?" Lorraine asked. Melissa's voice dropped to a whisper. "The house would be sold. We'd manage things for you." Lorraine inhaled slowly. "You drugged your mother," she said. Not loudly, not angrily, simply stating fact. Melissa's eyes filled. "It was supposed to be temporary." "Being left in freezing temperatures isn't temporary," Lorraine replied. Atlas lay beneath the cafe table, silent but present. "Are you going to press charges?" Melissa asked. Lorraine studied her daughter's face for a long moment. "I've allowed the investigation to proceed," she said. "Consequences are not revenge. They are boundaries." Melissa's shoulders sagged. When Lorraine stood to leave, she did not embrace her daughter. She simply nodded once. Outside, winter sunlight reflected sharply off snowbanks. The air was crisp, clean. Within a month, the house sold. Lorraine did not move south. She did not relocate to a suburban condo near either of her children. Instead, she packed her remaining belongings into a modest moving truck and drove north again, toward the ranger district that had answered her call. The small rural town sat nestled between forested hills, its main street lined with brick storefronts and old-fashioned lampposts. It wasn't glamorous. It was practical. She rented a small 2-bedroom cabin just outside town limits. The porch overlooked a stretch of pines that swayed gently in the winter wind. Atlas explored every inch of the new property before finally settling near the front door. "This feels different," Lorraine murmured, stepping onto the porch. Different did not mean easy. The first few nights, she woke from dreams of snow and silence. But each time, the forest outside her window felt familiar now, not threatening. She began volunteering with the nonprofit Torres had mentioned. The organization focused on teaching wilderness awareness to older adults, how to read trails, how to conserve body heat, how to recognize when something felt wrong. During her first session, she stood before a group of retirees in a community center hall, Atlas seated calmly at her side. Preparation isn't fear, she told them. It's respect for the environment and for yourself. Atlas demonstrated recall commands and scent tracking basics, guided gently by Lorraine's quiet voice. The participants watched with admiration. "He saved you, didn't he?" one woman asked afterward. Lorraine looked down at Atlas. "He led me," she said. Word spread slowly. More seniors signed up for training. The old firewatch cabin where she had sheltered was restored and stocked with updated emergency supplies through nonprofit funding, partially from Lorraine's own redirected estate. She visited the tower once during early spring. The snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of earth beneath. She stood at the base of the structure, hand resting on the rough wooden railing. "I came here by accident," she whispered to Atlas. "Now I'm here on purpose." Atlas wagged his tail once. Back in town, life settled into a steady rhythm. Morning walks, volunteer sessions. There's occasional check-ins from Ranger Torres regarding the ongoing investigation. Grant and Melissa attempted contact periodically. She answered when necessary. She kept conversations brief. The emotional tether that once bound her tightly to their approval had loosened. She was no longer reacting. She was building. And in the quiet evenings as she sat on her small cabin porch, watching dusk settle over the pines, Lorraine felt something she had not felt in years. Not dependence, not obligation. Choice. The forest that had once been a place of abandonment had become a place of direction. Atlas rested at her feet, eyes scanning the tree line not in warning, but in watchful peace. Lorraine sipped her tea and allowed herself a small, steady breath. She had not returned to the life she had before. She had stepped into a different one. And spring arrived slowly in the northern woods. Snow receded into narrow gray ridges along shaded ditches, and the pine scent deepened as the ground thawed. Lorraine Whitaker adjusted easily to the rhythm of her new town. Early mornings, community center sessions, quiet evenings on her porch, with Atlas at her feet. The investigation remained open, though it moved quietly. Lorraine had chosen not to push it aggressively, but neither had she shielded her children from its progress. Documents were filed, statements recorded. The facts sat where they belonged. She had made her boundaries clear. Grant called less frequently now. Melissa's messages had shifted from defensive to uncertain. Weeks passed without direct confrontation, until one afternoon in late April. So Lorraine was finishing a training demonstration behind the Ranger District building. A small group of older participants practiced basic navigation skills using compasses and trail markers, while Atlas demonstrated recall under distraction. Laughter carried across the clearing. Light, genuine. As the session ended and people dispersed, a familiar SUV pulled into the gravel lot. Lorraine recognized it immediately. Atlas did too. His posture changed, not aggressive but aware. Grant stepped out first. Melissa followed. Neither looked angry. They looked unsettled. Torres, who had been observing the training from a distance, glanced at Lorraine questioningly. "It's fine," she said quietly. "I'll handle it." She walked toward the parking area with Atlas beside her, leash loose but ready. Grant removed his sunglasses. Mom?" "Grant." Melissa folded her arms, then dropped them again, unsure. "You look," Grant began, scanning the clearing behind her. "Busy." "I am," Lorraine replied calmly. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the wind rustling lightly through budding branches. "We didn't expect you to move out here," Melissa said. "I didn't either," Lorraine answered. Grant exhaled sharply. "You've made this very public. Estate changes, trustees, donations." "Transparent," Lorraine corrected. Grant's jaw tightened. "You're giving away what should stay in the family." Lorraine met his gaze evenly. I'm investing it in something that reflects my values. Melissa stepped forward slightly. You're punishing us. Lorraine shook her head once. No. And I'm declining to finance your decisions. The simplicity of the statement landed harder than any accusation. Grant's frustration surfaced. We made a mistake. It got out of control. But you're destroying everything over one bad choice. One bad choice? Lorraine repeated quietly. You left me in freezing conditions without a phone. Silence. Melissa's eyes glistened. We thought you'd be found quickly. By whom? Lorraine asked. Neither answered. Atlas shifted closer to her leg. Grant's voice lowered. Drop the investigation. Let's settle this privately. Lorraine studied her son's face carefully. The tension. The fear. Not of guilt, but of consequence. The investigation isn't mine to drop, she said. It's already documented. You could speak on our behalf, Melissa urged. I have, Lorraine replied. I told them the truth. Grant ran a hand through his hair. You're choosing strangers over us. Lorraine's expression did not harden. It clarified. I am choosing safety over denial. A long pause settled between them. I don't hate you, she added quietly, but I will not ignore what happened. Melissa's shoulders slumped. So that's it? We just lose you? You lost me the moment you decided I was expendable, Lorraine said softly. The wind lifted slightly, carrying the scent of thawing earth. Grant's gaze drifted to Atlas. That dog turned you against us. Lorraine glanced down at her companion. He warned me before I understood. He stayed when you didn't. The statement hung heavy. Torres remained at a respectful distance, present but uninvolved. Grant inhaled sharply. Oh, if charges are filed, Lorraine interrupted calmly. That will be a reflection of your actions, not my anger. Melissa wiped her eyes. We thought you were slipping, that it would be easier for everyone. For everyone? Lorraine asked. Neither responded. Lorraine stepped slightly back, signaling the end of the conversation. I won't fund your instability, she said, and I won't pretend this didn't happen. But I'm not here to destroy you either. What happens next depends on what you choose to become. Grant stared at her for a long moment, then looked away. Melissa nodded faintly, as if absorbing something difficult but unavoidable. They returned to the SUV without another word. The engine started. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as they pulled away, as Lorraine stood still until the vehicle disappeared down the road. Atlas exhaled softly beside her. Torres approached quietly. You all right? Yes, she said. She meant it. The confrontation had not been explosive. It had not required raised voices or dramatic ultimatums. It had required steadiness. As the afternoon light shifted over the clearing, Lorraine turned back toward the training field. A few volunteers were packing up equipment. Everything okay? One of them asked. Everything's clear, she replied. Atlas walked beside her as she resumed her work. The emotional tether had not snapped in rage. It had dissolved in clarity. She did not feel victorious. She felt unburdened. And for the first time since that clearing in the forest, the air around her felt entirely her own, as summer settled gently over the northern woods, replacing the sharp bite of winter with warm sun and long evenings. The nonprofit had grown steadily. What began as a small wilderness safety initiative for older adults had expanded into monthly workshops, trail walks, and community talks. Lorraine found herself standing in front of groups again, not in hospital scrubs, but in hiking boots and a canvas vest, teaching others how to read terrain and trust their instincts. Atlas had become something of a local figure. Children in town waved at him. Retirees brought dog treats tucked in coat pockets. But when Lorraine worked, Atlas worked. He demonstrated directional commands, tracked scent trails during practice exercises, and showed participants how animals often sense shifts in environment before humans do. One afternoon, Ranger Torres approached her after a training session. We're officially reopening the old fire watch cabin, he said. The nonprofit funding helped restore it. New emergency kits, updated radio, reinforced steps. Lorraine's chest tightened slightly. You should see it, he added. It's different now. She nodded slowly. I will. A week later, under a sky washed clear and blue, Lorraine returned to the trail. She parked at the same access road where months earlier her life had tilted sharply off course. The clearing looked smaller now in daylight, almost ordinary. Wildflowers had begun pushing through patches of dirt where snow once lay thick. Atlas stepped out of the car and scanned the tree line, but his body was relaxed. Lorraine stood still for a moment, listening to birdsong drifting between the pines. This time, she murmured, we walk in by choice. They followed the trail at a steady pace. The incline that once felt punishing now felt manageable. Lorraine's breathing remained even. Her steps were firm. When the old tower came into view, restored and standing tall against the sky, she paused. Fresh wood reinforced the stairs. A new metal sign identified it as an emergency shelter maintained by the local nonprofit. The small cabin beneath had been cleaned, stocked, and sealed properly against the elements. She climbed the steps slowly, one hand on the railing. Atlas followed, careful but confident. Inside the cabin, sunlight filtered through the window. Shelves were neatly organized, emergency blankets stacked precisely. The radio mounted firmly, upgraded but still simple. Lorraine ran her hand across the wooden wall where she had once leaned, shivering. The memory did not overwhelm her. It steadied her. Atlas walked to the doorway and sat, facing outward as he had that first morning. You stood guard, she said quietly. She stepped back outside and moved toward the edge of the clearing, the spot where she had woken alone. Grass now covered the ground. Only faint impressions in the earth hinted at the past. Lorraine closed her eyes briefly. She did not replay the fear. She did not relive the betrayal. She simply acknowledged it. Footsteps approached softly behind her. Torres had joined her, giving space but remaining nearby. Hard to imagine, he said gently. Yes, she replied. And not. He studied her expression. You could have left all this behind. I have moved far away. I did move, she said, just not away from it. They stood together in quiet understanding. Charges? He asked after a moment. The investigation concluded, she said. Formal warnings, legal documentation. Enough. He nodded. Sometimes that's enough. Lorraine looked out over the trees, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. I didn't want to ruin them, she said softly. But I wouldn't pretend nothing happened. That's balance, Torres replied. Atlas rose and came to her side, pressing gently against her leg. She smiled faintly. As the afternoon sun shifted, casting long golden light through the branches, Lorraine felt something settle fully inside her. Not anger, not grief, peace. She had been left to die in the forest. She had survived. And more than that, she had chosen what came next. Atlas nudged her hand. Ready? She asked him. He wagged his tail once. They began walking back down the trail together, not escaping, not searching, simply moving forward. A year passed. Seasons turned the forest in slow, deliberate cycles. Green to gold, gold to white, white back to green again. The town no longer felt temporary to Lorraine Whitaker. It felt rooted. The cabin she rented had become home, not because of its size or structure, but because of the life she had built inside it. The nonprofit expanded beyond expectations. Monthly workshops became weekly. Local clinics partnered with her to teach safety planning for older adults who lived alone. Atlas remained at the center of every demonstration, steady and disciplined, a living reminder that awareness could mean survival. Grant and Melissa's presence in her life shifted into something distant and defined. They called occasionally. Conversations were measured. Boundaries remained intact. The legal documentation from the investigation sat filed and final. There had been consequences, professional, financial, personal, but Lorraine had not needed to pursue destruction to secure justice. She had chosen clarity. Now, on a bright morning almost exactly 1 year after the day she woke alone in the snow, Lorraine stood once again at the entrance to the forest trail. Atlas stepped out of the car first, tail low but relaxed. This time, she said softly, we're not proving anything. The air was warm with late summer sunlight. Cicadas hummed faintly in the distance. The path ahead was visible, no longer threatening. They walked slowly, deliberately. Lorraine felt the strength in her legs that had grown over the past year. Her breathing was steady, her steps sure. She carried water, a small pack, and a whistle. Practical, prepared, not fearful. The trees parted gradually as they reached the familiar clearing. It looked ordinary now. Grass had grown thick over the place where she had once fallen. No mark remained of tire tracks. No shadow lingered from that dusk. Lorraine stopped. Atlas sat beside her without command. For a moment, memory flickered. The blur of sedative, the cold ground, the hollow silence. But it did not consume her. It passed through like wind through branches. "I thought that was the end," she whispered. Atlas leaned lightly against her leg. She knelt slowly, pressing her palm against the earth. The ground was warm. "I wasn't left to die," she said quietly. "I was left to decide." She rose and turned toward the tower trail. The restored fire watch cabin stood proudly above the trees, its wood brighter, stronger than before. Volunteers had repainted the sign. Emergency kits were inspected monthly. The radio tested regularly. What had once been a forgotten structure was now a maintained safeguard. Lorraine climbed the steps again, Atlas following closely. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of fresh wood and clean air. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the neatly stacked supplies. She touched the wall again, the same spot where she had once leaned, exhausted and uncertain. "This place changed everything," she murmured. Not because it rescued her, because it revealed her. Outside, she walked to the edge of the clearing once more, where forest met open sky. She stood quietly, Atlas at her side, and allowed herself to see the full arc of what had happened. She had trusted her children. They had chosen fear and self-interest over responsibility. She had trusted her dog. He had chosen loyalty without hesitation. But survival had not come from loyalty alone. It had come from the decision to follow it. Lorraine looked down at Atlas. "You led me," she said softly, "but I chose to move." Atlas wagged his tail once, calm and certain. A breeze moved through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and late summer earth. Lorraine felt no bitterness. She felt gratitude, not for what had happened, but for what she had uncovered about herself because of it. Sometimes the ones who abandon you reveal your true strength. And sometimes loyalty, no matter its form, leads you not just to safety, but to a new purpose. She did not say the words aloud. She lived them. After a long, quiet moment, Lorraine turned back toward the trail. "Ready to head home?" she asked. Atlas rose immediately.
They walked away from the clearing together, not in retreat, not in fear, but in peace. The forest no longer held the memory of being left behind. It held the memory of standing up. And Lorraine Whitaker, who had once walked along in the snow, walked forward with steady steps, knowing she would never again mistake silence for helplessness. The path ahead were hers, and she chose it. Lorraine didn't just survive the forest, she worked out of it knowing exactly who she was. The people she trusted failed her, but the loyalty beside her and the trend within behind her led her somewhere better than she had ever planned. Sometimes being left behind is the moment you finally see what you are capable of becoming. If you were in Lorraine's place, would you have forgiven your children or chosen distant like she did? Share your honest thought below. I read everyone. And if story about resilience, loyalty, and second chance move you, consider subscribing so we can work the next journey together.